Welcome everyone today. I'm Dr. Amy Novotny, and I'm here to share with you an incredible journey I had down to Antarctica to photograph Antarctica, the sea ice, and the emperor penguin colony. I had an opportunity of a lifetime, and I want to share all of it with you so that you can see what an amazing Earth we have and what we can even do to help this Earth that's changing by the day. And we can do a lot because even something down there impacts us here and vice versa. So as we go along here, I'm going to give you little bits of the journey, a little bit about the sea ice, Antarctica, and about the emperor penguins. So first, I just want to share a little bit about our journey. And we went from the bottom tip of Antarctica, of Argentina. We went from the bottom tip of Argentina in a little town called Ushuaia, which means end of the earth. From there, we boarded a Russian icebreaker ship and crossed the Southern Ocean through the Drake Passage to the eastern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. We went to an area called Snow Hill Island. Now, we didn't actually land on the island, but we got very close to it because we had sea ice all around us. That's where the emperor penguin colony of Snow Hill lives. During that journey, and I'll share in a little bit here, we went through some harrowing times, and it was quite interesting. Before we even left, we had to go through training on the lifeboats, and then we got going. On the way, we did have a little bit of fun, and we stopped to see what it was like to walk on sea ice that was thick enough and safe enough for us to walk on. So I was playing a little bit with the ship, and obviously I couldn't move it at all, but I still had a lot of fun to see, be right next to the ship and see how big it is. When you're on the ship, you don't gain that perspective, but when you're on the ice right next to it, and we could actually get right up close to it to see what it looked like when it was breaking through ice. This actually is important because it also shows us how the ship breaks through ice. So it must go on top of ice and then break it, and go up and break it. And this was the first time in 8 years that the ship had taken a group of people down to Snow Hill. So it was a very special trip. And of course, it led us to these amazing creatures, something that I could never have dreamed of. It's not something that you can actually think of, and the pictures don't even do it justice. I tried as best as I could, but it was the most spectacular moment to walk up to an emperor penguin colony. One of the things that you'll find that's consistent theme of my presentation here is the emperor penguins were all about peace and love. They hadn't experienced humans. Most of these penguins had never seen humans, if any of them had ever seen humans in their life. But yet, they were warm, they were inviting, they didn't have any fear of us. And the chicks were curious, the adults were very attentive, but it was all about peace and harmony. And we need that as much as possible in our lives because it fills ourselves with love. And as you'll see as we go through here, how much I loved these penguins and what they represent. Getting to Antarctica was a bit of a difficult journey. Ideally, it would take 3 days to get over there. It took us 5 days. You never know with the Drake Passage and the Southern Oceans. It's one of the worst oceans in the world in terms of storms. It could either be smooth as ice or it could be choppy and horrible. We got choppy and horrible, which makes for a great adventure and great stories. After 3 days of being in the ocean and being tossed around like sardines, we got into the Antarctic Sound. As we got closer to land, we saw more evidence of climate change. Now, in these scenes right here, we can see some land and some icebergs around it. Now, Antarctica is usually covered, the land itself is usually covered in ice, just from the cold temperatures. That ice expands out into the sea. Unfortunately, there was evidence there's a lot of area where the sea ice wasn't expanding far from the land. And that's part of the problem with the climate change that's going on right now. We're seeing less and less sea ice close to land. That plays an important role in the ecosystem and how it influences all the animal populations living there. Part of wildlife photography is studying animals and studying their behavior. Much of the time that I was out there, I sat and I watched, and I got to see all the interactions between the parents and the chicks. The parents were absolutely amazing. The females must march all the way to the sea, sometimes up to 50 miles. Often they march on feet, and there's usually like a leader, and the other penguins follow suit. They were very much in sync with each other, and you can tell that even just by how they move. They would lean to the side altogether, lean to another side altogether, but they would follow each other along. When they got tired walking, or if they got overheated, they would switch to moving on their bellies. This guy was sliding right towards us as we were sitting there, as I was sitting there photographing, and he was coming right at me. One of the things that was shocking to me when I saw my first penguin, and just even the expanse of the colony, was how clean these birds were. We know that birds spend a lot of their time preening their feathers, getting themselves clean to ready to fly. Well, the penguins were no different. They were absolutely stunning in how beautiful and how clean they kept themselves. They like to go in different almost acrobatic moves when they were preening themselves and getting themselves cleaned, scratches, you name it. And you can see when they capture fish, they have these little tiny protrusions that actually keep the fish in them. So getting up close personal shots from them, it allowed me to see a little bit more about their anatomy that describes their lifestyle. So the baby emperor penguin, these guys were about 2 months old. And at this point, they were starting to get a little bit more courageous. They were testing the boundaries just like kids do. When that happened, they would venture away from their parent, but it helped when they formed groups called crushes. They were literally like school children. They would form this group, go from one aspect of the colony over to another aspect, turn around, and go back. So in this shot, they all decided to climb up onto this iceberg. So I watched them go all the way up on the iceberg, stay there for about 3 minutes. Then one decided he's going to turn around and go back over towards the colony, and so he started going down, and guess what? They all started following. In this big crush, there was probably about 40 to 50 little penguins, and they had one adult coming along after them. The adult kind of oversees them just like a teacher would with school children. And as it started coming closer, they started walking towards me. And they got closer and closer. We're also very affectionate with each other. A lot of times they would curl up into balls. Sometimes they would swat at each other, but they were always very loving. I never saw any fighting where they were hurting each other. It was such a peaceful atmosphere. This little guy right here is even younger than some of the other chicks. He was born late, and unfortunately, he probably won't survive. The reason why is, so we were there in October. They have about 2 more months to change out of their down fur into waterproof penguin feathers. Unfortunately, the sea ice is going to melt before he's able to do that. So that part of it was hard, and that's another reason why if we don't have as much global climate change and if we don't have the hotter weather, the sea ice will be thicker in areas and it wouldn't be so destructive to little chicks that already have a hard enough time surviving, from the weather to the skuas to the gulls. If we add in climate change that affects the sea ice underneath them, it makes it even harder for the species to survive. Climate change was very evident down in Antarctica. We were supposed to be having about 15-degree Fahrenheit days, but it was up into the 50s. There were times that I was actually shedding the multiple layers of clothing and laying down on sea ice with the penguins just to cool down. It was absolutely incredible. And unfortunately, because of the hotter temperatures, we also didn't have the storms and the blizzards that we were expecting and we should have seen. So we did see scenes like this where the ice was melting and it was creating a lot of it was creating a dirty scene from just, feces and excrement from the penguins, which we shouldn't have seen because it should have been a blanket of white ice. It was evidence that their life is changing just as much as the world is changing. So as we wrap this up, I must say that the scenes that we caught were almost cartoon-like. There were times where it doesn't look real. It looks like someone created this on a computer, but it's very real. I lived an amazing experience, and I can't describe how much of an impact it has on me. I make choices in daily life that reflect that, and there are things like I used to do krill oil or fish oil, and I don't do that anymore. The krill is something that they eat, and so if we can get rid of harvesting some of the foods that they eat, it can provide some way to help. There were a lot of scientists on our ship, and they discussed many of the ways that humans impact the animals. And every single scientist there said, if you could get the message out to humans, if you could do one thing, is stop going after the krill, stop going after the food sources for the animals. Think about how much electricity you're using. Think about how much water you're using. Every little bit counts, because every year their life is changing because of our impact. But the thing is, we're doing it to ourselves as well. And if we can have some impact to allow a colony like this to survive and to thrive, we create a magical place that hopefully other people can visit, or you can see through photography like this. I was very fortunate to go there, and I know my presence being there can be controversial as well, because ideally we don't want to impact the colony, but at the same time we also need to explore a place like this where we're not leaving our trace, so we can learn about it and we can see how much our daily actions are impacting a beautiful colony like this. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you have questions, I would love to answer more questions. Please reach out to me. You can reach me at amy@paberinstitute.com, PABRinstitute.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk about this and share more. Thank you guys for your time.